ever had that experience where life seems to come full circle? Years ago, I heard a radio interview that really shaped how I approach looking at my kids' education, their personalities, and my response as a mom to their individual needs. And that interview was with Cynthia Tobias, and her work has been a go-to on my bookshelf ever since. And guess what? Today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast from All Mom Does, I get to bring a fresh conversation with Cynthia to you. I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. I'm so glad you've tuned in today, and I know you're going to gain so many insights about your kids and their education and learning experiences from someone who's been a mentor to me through the radio waves and her books. Cynthia, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Julie. That's great.
So, Cynthia, you have been in this space a long time, writing on personality style, learning styles, really trying to help people find their connection and where they fit in the world and honor that. What started that passion for you?
I was a high school teacher in public school, and I was a brand new teacher, and I was so excited to teach because I just knew my students would be very excited to learn. And all of a sudden, I realized very quickly they weren't excited to learn. Not only were they not excited to learn, they felt like school, a lot of them, school was a prison sentence, a place that you had to just endure until you could get paroled or escape. And so I sort of started my quest to find out how can we make this as exciting as it really is. Learning is exciting. It's discovery. It's all these wonderful things. And so in my effort to do that, I stumbled across a seminar at Seattle Pacific University, and it was a weekend seminar for teachers. And learning styles experts were there from the East Coast, and I'd never even actually heard the term. This was way back in the late 70s, early 80s. And but they stood up there and they said, you know, there are so many ways to learn, so many ways that our mind works, so many ways to teach, but we really just barely scratched the surface. And then they started talking about strengths and all this, and I just sat straight up in my seat and I thought, they've been talking about what I've believed all this time. But they said there's research to prove it. So I went on my quest and my graduate degree to find the research, and I did, but it was good and solid, but really boring and lengthy. And I figured I want to deal with people in the trenches, parents and teachers, and they don't have time. So I really felt like God called me at that time and through all my life is go to the research, make sure you're grounded in good research, but then take it out to the street where the rest of the people live and just translate. Here's what it says. Here are the practical things. And here's what I know work. So, you know, I'm not considered a researcher. I don't really want to be, but I've seen it in 32 years now do amazing things with kids. The minute I went back to my high school classroom with just even as little as I had learned, right away, it changed everything about my teaching. And it changed those kids' lives because all of a sudden we were talking about them, we were talking about strengths, and we were talking about why do you think this is frustrating? What do you think you could do? And if you're going to do something that's difficult for you, what do you need in order to make it work? And so you're not looking for excuses and you're not looking for reasons to whine or check out. You're saying, oh, wait a minute. If you mean I could do it that way, because if I could do it that way, I think I would get it. And it was radically changing, life-changing for so many of us. And so I've been kind of preaching that gospel along with the other for, you know, all my life practically. It seems like it was so exciting and continues to be to this day. I learn something new every single seminar I teach, every single group I talk to. It's pretty incredible.
You know, your work for me was very, very seminal because we were trying to determine what we were going to do with our kids' educations and the best approach. And at the time I discovered you, I think I had 2 or 3 children. I can't remember exactly where I was in all of the birthing at that point. But I got to hear you the first time on Focus on the Family. And you started walking through this. And I mean, light bulbs just went on all over the place for me. For us, what that ultimately resulted in is we chose to homeschool our kids and are still actively homeschooling today. It's quite the amalgam at this point. There are all kinds of tutors involved and, you know, one day, you know, workshops with other homeschoolers. It's all kind of quite a potpourri at this point. But at that point, we pulled the kids home and I started working with them full time. And one of the things that was so powerful to me was the permission, particularly with one of our kids, who truly, he practically needed to be on a treadmill. Not even practically. He literally, at times, I would put him on a treadmill because he needed the physical in order to engage the brain. He would stand on his head and do Legos sometimes while I would be trying to teach math facts, but he would get it. Now, I had the in quotes, luxury to do that with them. But my precious in-laws, both of whom were career public educators, were principals, I understand the challenge for families who homeschool's not an option, and customizing for their child is not an option to that level. And we have a very engaged but very tired and worn out public school, staff trying to help facilitate. How can parents work well in their school situations to help customize for kids when kids do have such varying needs in the way that they process information?
Well, one of the things that's been really exciting, especially in the last few years, we talk about kids taking responsibility for their own success. And when I talk to kids in junior high and high school especially, I say, sometimes you'll get a teacher that'll teach just the way you learn and just enjoy it because it's a wonderful gift, but it's not going to happen very often. And sometimes when you finish school, you'll go out in the world and the world will do exactly what you want it to. Hardly ever, though. So here's the deal. You need to know what your strengths are. You need to figure them out and figure out what they are. And of course, everybody's kind of living proof that their way works, right? That's why the parents don't always get it and we don't always get our parents. You figure out your strengths. Knowing this about myself, what do I need in order to succeed? And then you're ready to prove it works. In other words, you don't get to say, oh, I just give up. You get to walk into any classroom anywhere, including college or any work situation. You look around and you think, uh-oh, none of this works for me, none of it. So you do have a choice now, though. If you know your own strengths and your learning styles, you can either say, well, I give up and I don't want to do it. Or you can say, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to definitely need to study in the morning and I'm going to need to find a person for a group project. And you can start going through a list of things that you know about yourself to say, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to succeed in a place where it seems like everything's against me, here's what I need to know. And that's one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids. Julie, I know you know that. Because as early as possible, we're teaching them some coping techniques that focus on their strengths instead of the idea that they walk into places and think, oh, this is my weakness. They come in with a whole different perspective saying, uh-oh, going to have to click into this gear in order to survive. Then nothing has to daunt them. Nothing has to conquer them. They get to say when they quit. Nobody else gets to say you're no good at this or you can't do it. They get to decide what to do. And that's a very powerful thing. And it also, by shifting that responsibility to the learner, it takes a lot of the pressure off of teachers,
right,
off of parents, because we can ask questions. Even our 3rd, 4th, 5th graders that are all discouraged or I hate school or whatever, say, what do you think it is about this that's driving you crazy? Why do you think this is really difficult for you? And then you get them thinking, because once you figure out, okay, if I could do it this way, then is there a way you could do that? Could you ask your teacher? No, she's not open to anything. She would never let me do that. Okay, then let's you and I, when you get home for your homework and when you have the time on your own, you know how to structure your work. And when you're with a teacher that won't budge, you just say, okay, I'm going to try to get as much as I can out of this. And I know that if I took notes, that would help. And if I just listen and don't look at the distracting part of her, that would help. See, we give kids these kind of tools, and then we give them the world, essentially, because they get to decide when to quit and when to succeed.
I think that is beautiful and so empowering. Our heartbeat became that we wanted our kids to know how to be autodidactic, meaning we wanted them to have the ability to teach themselves and to use a teacher or something they were watching online or whatever as a resource, but ultimately begin to inculcate it. And it was very fascinating to watch that play out when they did go into more traditional college settings after having been home standing on their heads playing with Legos and being on the treadmill. I thought, is this going to translate? If I hamstrung them in a sense because I've created an environment that's perfect for their learning, but what's going to happen when they get into a more corporate situation? And thankfully, those skills did translate. They do understand things about themselves. But I had to fight, and I know a lot of moms fight out there the same way, this sense of, well, if they're listening to like really loud music or they've got all these distractions going on, how can they possibly learn in that environment? Speak into that, Cynthia, for us, that, we have to be willing to really listen to what our kids are showing us about themselves and the way they learn, even if it doesn't look like sitting at a desk in a very organized, quiet environment.
I've had many moms come up and say, if to do his homework, he wants to be on his stomach on the floor with a can of Diet Coke and headphones and the TV in the background. And I telling him, there's no way you can concentrate by doing that. But he says that's the only way you can learn. And what I tell them is, well, anything that's within the rules of the house, you let him say, okay, look, you say this is what you need to study. I'm going to give you 3 days to to prove that works. Because you know that the homework has to be done before you go to bed. Now, if in 3 days or a week, if you're not doing that, then I get to say, I don't think so. We're not going to try it this way. If, however, and what often happens, you're actually 3 or 4 days in, you find out the kid that's doing what would be impossible to you actually is proving that the homework's getting done, that the grades are going up, then you have to say, whoa, okay. So the bottom line is, and again, that goes back to, for them to be ready to prove it works. You have to prove it works. And a lot of times parents say, well, I can't just let everybody do everything. I mean, what about if I have a lot of kids? They're all going to want the same exceptions. And I say, not necessarily. You'll be surprised. Even as a teacher, I'd have a student come up and say, I don't like tests. I'm really panicked at tests. I don't want to take a test, and I just don't like it. And I'd say, okay, you don't have to take a test. Really? I said, no, I just need to know. You have to prove to me that you know what the 8 parts of speech are and how to use them. And so if you want to do something else, and 9 times out of 10, the kid would go, never mind, I'll just take the test. Because it's one of those things where you ask and answer, so what's the point? What am I trying to accomplish? And as a parent, we have our best idea already on how to do it. And why wouldn't we? I mean, we have to be organized, especially if you've got multiple kids. Same in a teacher. In a classroom, if you've got 30 kids, you can't be letting them all just do whatever they want. So you just say, look, here's the thing. In the classroom, this is what it needs to do, because the point is, I have to be able to give this information to you. Or you say, at home, I need to know when you turn this in that you've done this and this. So if you want to do it a different way, that's fine, but you're going to have to prove that it accomplished what I told you it needed to accomplish. Now, that's a very transferable skill to the workplace.
Absolutely.
If you've taught your kids in your homeschool environment and you're thinking, well, maybe I've sort of spoiled them because they've got an ideal situation. Well, as well as I do now, maybe they'll choose the right job.
Right.
Maybe they'll choose a job that actually fulfills them, and they'll avoid the jobs in the end that are only going to bring them stress and grief and tension. So I know that parents are a little nervous saying, well, you've got to prepare them for the world, and that's all true, but part of preparing them for the world is figure out what your strengths are and what you're going to need, and then look for those areas and opportunities where you can use them. And if you get stuck in a place where you're at a disadvantage, go back to those strengths and say, how am I going to get past this?
And you have so many books that you've written through the years. I pulled up before I was on with the interview with you just the various titles, and we'll make sure and link those in the show notes for our listeners, because there's such a wealth here of so many different tools, approaches, ways to begin to identify those strengths and put those into action in ways that are so beneficial and can take a lot of the crazy out of mom's world when she's able to understand why her child is approaching school and other challenges in the ways that child is. Now, I want to pivot just a little bit, because I've got some of these at my house. Okay, I have a bunch of these at my house. I might just myself be one. You have done a lot of work on what we call the strong-willed child, and you have a book called You Can't Make Me, But I Can Be Persuaded. That subtitle, I think, is brilliant. So talk to us about the work you've done in this space when it comes to those kids who just seem to... I have a friend that her family name, what they've always called her, is Stands with a Fist, because it's just, she is just going to be staunch, and she's not going to be pushed, and she's not going to be pressed. So what have you found in your research about those that we identify as strong-willed, and how do we make that a harmonious and supportive environment without getting run over by a strong-willed kid, but at the same time not squashing one that has a strong will as well?
Right. Well, it takes one to know one, as you know. and I have one, because my mother prayed that would be so. What goes around comes around. And but my favorite has always been the strong-willed child for almost 30 years now. I've talked to thousands and thousands of them. And one of the good things, the really good things about a strong will, is that you're not easily daunted. You're not easily discouraged. You have the strength of your convictions. You're going to change the world one way or the other. So as parents, we want to make sure with a young strong-willed child, it comes to them raw. This whole strong will comes raw. You don't know how to use it, and you use it inappropriately, and you make people mad with it. But how do you know how to use it? And so if you're a strong-willed parent, one of the best things you can do, of course, is to model for them how to use your strong will. Because as your children are growing up, they're looking at, oh, that's how you're supposed to handle conflict. Oh, that's what adults do when they don't get their way. And what we find with strong-willed kids especially is a couple of key things you need to know. You really can't make me. There's nothing you cannot physically, even for a baby, There are certain things you cannot make them do. You cannot make them not go to the bathroom. You cannot make them, digest food that they don't want. You can force it down there. That doesn't have to stay down. So as a strong-willed child, I figured that out right away. And wait a minute. You can't actually make me do that. I can take the consequence. I know there'll be a consequence, as well there should be, because I don't get by with bad behavior. And I've never talked, by the way, and I've talked in prisons and everywhere else, I've never talked to a strong-willed child of any age who thinks they ought to get by with bad behavior. But it always seems to be worth a try, because if someone's kind of weak or easily a pushover, then, hey, maybe I can do what I want. And so we really do, we need and we welcome the discipline, but it's how you communicate your authority that makes all the difference in the world. It's keeping your voice firm and keeping it relatively low. In other words, you're not screaming, you're not yelling, and if you have to repeat it a few times, don't let the level of your voice go up. We call it the broken record, right? That we're not going for ice cream until your room is clean. I have to, and you're doing it. That's fine. But we're not going for ice cream till your room is clean. I'm not going to clean it because you can't make me clean it. And when they finish their little rage, you just say, well, okay, but I guess we're not going for ice cream because we can't go for ice cream till your room is clean. And sometimes they'll go, fine, just shut up and stop saying that same thing. But being able to stay calm and reasonable and ask more questions. Instead of saying, get out of the shower now, we're going to be late. Say, hey, you about done in there? And Mike would say, no. And instead of saying, I need you to get out now, I'd say, need a couple more minutes? Yeah. And then I would walk away. And within about 30 seconds, he would get out. It's one of those things where I'm going to wait till the dust settles. And if you're pointing your bony finger at me and saying, you will do it this way, period, end of discussion, something in my strong-willed heart and soul says, wait a minute, that would be taking all control away from what I have to say over my own body. So I think I'm going to not do it just to prove that you can't actually make me. Does that make me a horrible person, a juvenile delinquent? It can certainly turn into that. But the wise parent dealing with the strong-willed child, and one of the reasons why You Can't Make Me is such a popular book, is that it's not original with me even. It works for so many, but it's thousands of us getting together and saying, look, if you really want cooperation, I'm happy to give it to you, but not if you do this. If you do this or say this, that tends to just all of a sudden set everything on edge and go sideways. But if you would have maybe done this or said this, I'm not questioning your authority, and I believe it's important to do what you say, but it makes it so much easier if you'll say it this way, or if you'll remember to do this. And just some key things. And again, when in doubt, just lower your voice. And with the Strong-Willed Child Emergency Kit, we have a little bookmark, and it's in chapter 7 of the book too. But when you're in a meltdown and you don't have time to read a book and you don't have time to listen to a podcast, you are in a meltdown here. Your 3 quick steps for that strong-willed child: right away, back off and give me a little space. Just hold on, especially if you're yelling. Just say, time out. You've got to give me a minute. Let's just give each other a minute. I'm not going to talk for a minute or two. And then you back off. And then in that space, then you're trying to decide, okay, so what am I really trying to accomplish here? What's the point? Maybe when I go back, I say, look, the bottom line is that trash has to get taken out. Now, if you don't want to take it out right this second, I got to tell you, within the next hour or so, it needs to be out there. Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to go to the bathroom then, and then I'll probably do it. But you pointed your finger and you told me I didn't have a choice. And then the third thing is, you just be honest. And in a meltdown even, you can pull things back together by saying, hold on. You know what? Maybe I said this the wrong way. Because let me just tell you what I'm trying to get at here. And I haven't really figured out yet how not to set you off, how to get you to cooperate instead of believe the best in me. Because I want to believe the best in you. So you can just be honest with me. Don't blow smoke at me. Just say, I don't honestly know what's going to get you to do this. What is it going to take for you to cooperate, do you think? All the time, you're not screaming, you're not using ultimatums, but you are holding a bottom line accountability, because you go back to, well, I'm sorry that you can't do that, because the bottom line is that's against the rules. Right. Now, if there's a way to get there that makes more sense to you, I'm happy to listen to it, but I cannot let this bottom line go.
And so I think it then satisfies both, because I do find with the kids in my life that I identify as mine that are strong-willed. And, they do need to believe that they made agreement to do it with me. And there are parents who feel like that's giving up territory, but I'm telling you, life is a whole lot sweeter if you can figure out components for cooperation. Back in just a minute with Cynthia Tobias. Fall is around the corner. It's time to refocus to make the end of the year strong. That's why I'm so excited for you to take a look at my newest project from Abington Women called Footnotes. It's a 4-week study on 4 characters from the Bible that you might think of as minor, but who have major impact. We sometimes feel bogged down in all the little things, the errands, the laundry, the cleaning. It's a powerful reminder that in God's eyes, little things are big things. The little things you do today can resonate next year, into the next decade, into the next century. Make this a Footnotes fall and take a few weeks to see for yourself how 4 people you may have never even noticed before speak into your life today. Footnotes, wherever books are sold, and look for the DVD teaching set at abingtonwomen.com/footnotes. Now, one of the things that I have found really fascinating with my strong-willed kiddos is I have those that you would know them standing on a street corner. You would be like, that's a strong-willed person. And you would know right off the top, they can walk into a room and you can identify it early. But I have a couple that I call stealth strong-willed people, because they are never to my face going to say, I don't want to take the trash out. I'm not doing that. They seem very, very compliant and sure. And then you discover that no, they're really doing exactly what they want. and so for me to have to come back around and remember, okay, are they actually on board with me or are they not? It has happened many a times. They are those stealth, strong-willed individuals. So help us distinguish how we can know, because I do think most of the time we know if we have a strong-willed person in our house, we know. But there are those that kind of slide under the limbo bar that are just much more difficult to identify until we really take a hard look over time at what's being accomplished.
Well, the easiest answer is everything in the book, everything we talk about with strong-willed kids works for everybody. Every child benefits by having more questions asked and fewer orders issued. Everybody benefits from identifying bottom line accountability and maybe giving some options. My sister, 5 years younger than me, she was not strong-willed. She always followed the rules. You could look at her crooked and everything would be fine. I was not an openly in-your-face, defiant, strong-willed child. Most of the time, you couldn't have traced half the trouble I caused back to me, because as long as you weren't pointing your bony finger in my face and telling me do it or else, I didn't really give you a whole lot of argument. The other key is, especially with my very strong-willed dad, we established a relationship between the two of us that I wanted to keep. And so whether I'm a more passive-aggressive strong-willed child or an in-your-face one of the key things is if you build a relationship with me in the good times, then in the bad times, I'm probably going to do what you say, if for no other reason, then I don't want to lose your relationship. If you're always yelling at me, always anticipating the worst, and even you really don't seem to want to even spend time with me, because like you say, when a strong-willed child enters a room, people aren't that happy to see you. But if you're not spending time really getting to know me and love and appreciate my strengths when I don't irritate you, then the relationship, it's not going to hold together. But if you have a relationship, there were people in my life, teachers and others, where I would have just done anything for them. I would have gone in, cleaned chalkboards, done things I would not do for anybody else. But because they had seemed to value me, they loved me, they talked to me, they truly treasured me, and they looked for ways to help me cooperate, then I would have done anything for them.
Speak to moms, too, about what I find is an interesting lane from time to time where we can have standards that really, why are we fighting for them? So, for example, I decided, and you get there when you have the number of children I do, but there was a fight that I wasn't going to fight anymore, which was over clothing, for example. Now, every now and then, if we had a family wedding, yes, I was going to throw down. But for pretty much anything else, I just decided that was not going to be a hill to die on. But I know a lot of moms, when it comes to having a strong-willed child in their house, and there's that mom out there that she herself is not strong-willed and is now trying to manage a child who's strong-willed, and it's just a completely foreign language to her. But how do we make sure that, yes, we do have some lines that need to be upheld? That's important, and that's life. That's a life skill. But at the same time, not oversaturate our standard schedule to a place that a child who is strong-willed and needs some say and needs some flex simply can't even get a breath of air.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that strong-willed kids reiterate over and over of all ages. Choose your battles. Decide what you want to go to the wall for and go to the wall for it. I know in dealing with moms of preschoolers, it almost always comes up what you just said, the clothing battle. They'll say, she wants to choose her own clothes. She chooses things that don't match. We have this huge fight before preschool. We get there late. We're both screaming and mad at each other. What should I do? And my standard answer, most of the time it's the same. And it's well, I tell moms either only put clothes in the drawers that actually match, or they have even a commercially marketed lanyard now that you can put around the child's neck that says, I dressed myself today. And as long as they're covered and they're gone, if you're going to make an issue with that, what are you going to lose down the line that would have been a lot more important? And so, again, it's hard to remember in the heat of the moment, but you have to think to yourself, wait a minute, is this worth it? Now, in our household, physical safety was always worth it. I'm not going to compromise when it comes to you being in your car seat or not walking out in traffic or doing anything that endangers you. Spiritual and moral values, those are absolutely go to the wall issues. But if I'm going to get those, I have to back off on exactly what you wear, exactly how you say something, exactly, I have to decide. I can't pick at everything or suddenly they'll just check out.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we make that mistake, and for good intentioned reasons, but we make the mistake between something that is a preference of ours and actually considering it a sin when someone doesn't comply with it. And those are two very, very different things that I think we have to be so cautious about to not confuse those. And I'm preaching to myself because I get in the same lane too. Now, talk to me about this. Do you see that sometimes when it comes to this topic of strong-willed, that there is a difference in the way we treat genders when it comes to a child who's male or a child who's female, and how we sometimes manage that strong-willed lane?
Sometimes, and it depends on the gender of the parent who's dealing with it. You and I both know, as a strong-willed girl, we can get our dad, and we can fool others. We can manipulate men sometimes easier than we can manipulate women, because the woman sees it, saying, "Oh no, I don't think so." But the man wants to give us the benefit. I had both. My twins were boys, and so I grew up with one sister, but I grew up raising boys, and I think with the strong-willed man, a lot of times in the culture, maybe not so much now, unfortunately, in some ways, the man is expected to be strong-willed and determined, and he's self-possessed and all that. But a strong-willed woman sometimes says, you're too bossy, you're too pushy, you're just a pushy broad, you need to back up. So I don't know. I think that stereotypes are kind of falling apart in our modern culture. And truthfully, I think strong will is so important to maintain. But using it in the right direction is critical. I'll take a strong-willed man or woman any day over one who's not. If I need leadership, if I need decision-making skills sometimes, if I want somebody to have my back, I want a good dose of strong will, but I want strong will. There's the difference in my book, A Woman of Strength and Purpose. We talk about the strong-willed woman whose heart belongs to God. That's a huge difference. The difference between a strong-willed woman with God and a strong-willed woman without God is huge.
I think that's an important distinction. Now, you referred to it earlier, part of our job as parents is not necessarily to figure out the perfect vocation for our child, but to help equip them to understand if they're strong-willed, if they're not, their learning styles, what kind of environments they embrace. And you've done a lot of work recently, and I still find it's difficult to lead kids into sort of their best life for them, their best purpose for them, when we don't even know it for ourselves. And so you've done a lot of work. You have a book called The Way We Work. What did you discover in that process about how we approach vocation, how we train our kids toward vocation, but the ways that it really seems to interrupt what is inside an individual that they're wired for? And yet sometimes we do have to take those positions that just have to do with grit and getting in the door of the organization. So how can moms and dads help balance that for their kids while also trying to figure it out for themselves?
Well, this is a brand new one that just came out this last summer. It's called The Way We Work, Taking Charge of Your Own Success. And one of the things it does, it takes a lot of what was in The Way They Learn and helps adults or young adults, or I use it even with junior high and high school students, to kind of figure out what your strengths in a practical way are. And what it does is it makes you a confident learner. So that when you choose the vocations, and we've got a whole chapter in there on kind of how to choose a job that fits. We have areas in there about what's going to cause you stress on the job. Because let's face it, what causes my sister stress on the job challenges me, and vice versa. So knowing yourself is really important to choose the right job. But just going in with the idea that I know my strengths, this is why this isn't making sense. I know that knowing myself the way I do, I think this is a good field for me, or this might really appeal to me, or this might never appeal to me. If this is a desk job and I'm a highly kinesthetic, active person, I think I ought to kind of stay away from that. And fortunately now, again, we have many more choices than we used to have. In fact, they say that, by 2030, 85% of the jobs then haven't even been invented yet right now. And that's not very far away. So we're equipping our young adults and our kids and the adults that are already in the workplace saying, well, I don't want to go back to school or do any more training because I can remember what it was like to be in a classroom. This gives you the confidence and instills the idea of, you know what, just because I didn't get a college degree or just because I didn't really succeed in school very well, this says a lot about me, though. I'm really good at this, and I think I could do it. And so it really gives you an opportunity to value every person as an individual for who they are and how God created them, and to remind them that God has a purpose for your life. You're going to make changes in the world and answer prayers in ways that nobody but you could. So it's really giving confidence in learning, but it's also helping those who are already in the workplace and those who lead in the workplace understand what you've got.
I think that's going to be a really interesting place for organizations to begin to span, because I hear sometimes, and it's not just sometimes, I often hear of a certain scope within organizations, almost sort of a derisive approach toward those that we would call within the millennial generation or Gen Z coming up. Oh, they've been raised like snowflakes and they've been told that things have to meet preferences. But at the same time, someone who is in the lane that they were created for and being honored for who they were created to be and being given license to go do what they're supposed to do is so powerfully effective in organizations. And yet we still sometimes, often find that grinding, that, place of friction between those who are like, well, I had to go do this, that, and the other to get to the position I'm in. And they want to be able to walk in and be right in their lane and their purpose. Where are they paying their dues? How do you navigate that gap generationally between organizations, or attitudinally? It's not necessarily just a generational thing, but attitudinally between in those organizations.
Well, again, awareness is half the battle. For one thing, the way they work, book, most kids, even adults, I'm not going to read a 350-page book on how to be a better employee or anything like that. So it's very short, it's very quick, it's very practical, immediately useful. So if awareness is half the battle, once you figure out the strengths and you go, oh, that's why I was so irritated with, or that's why it didn't make sense to me. So 50% of it is the awareness. And then there are certain timeless truths. The chances are good that there'll still be very few jobs where you don't have to pay your dues. And yeah, you do sometimes. I can remember one of my sons saying in high school, I said, Mike, what do you think of me want to do? He says, as soon as I get out of college, I want to open my own business. And I went, in what? I told God I wanted to be a writer when I was 18, right? But my first book wasn't published till almost 20 years later, because I think God said, what would you have written about? By the time you get to where you want to be, you're richer and you have more depth, and you have the ability to communicate with others what you learned about yourself and help them become confident learners.
Absolutely. Well, Cynthia, I know this is going to be of such encouragement to our listeners out there, to those moms and dads who are really wanting to do a great job and be intentional with their children, and yet sometimes feel like they are just confronted with mystery after mystery with some of the learning styles and personalities and all the things going on. Well, I thank you personally for me, because you have been a huge voice in my life. You haven't known it, but now you do. In all the things that I've been doing and the approach that I've taken, you've just really been such a treasure trove for me and how I've approached things with my own kids. And I'm just so delighted that we have listeners who maybe this is their first time getting to hear you. And I think that, again, your legacy just continues. So thank you for all the work that you've done in honoring the individuals that God made each of us to be, in honoring the weaving and the knitting that He put into each of us, and helping equip us to know how to do that better as moms and dads, to honor those children He's put in our lives.
Thank you. Blessings to you.
Be sure and check out the show notes that our content coordinator, Rebecca Beckett, puts together for you each and every episode. And you'll find in the show notes where you can connect with Cynthia. And come say hi to me too. I'm over at all the places social and particularly on the grams at Julie Lyles Carr. AllMomDoes.com is the place to be on the webs. You'll find an amazing community to connect with and information, articles, little gems that will inspire and encourage you in the life you lead. Rebecca Beckett is our content coordinator. Donna Tody is our producer, and you make us all so very happy if you just take a moment wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review. We so appreciate it. I'll see you next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.